I was standing in a sunlit room surrounded by 50 high society women, holding back tears as my future mother-in-law handed me a literal scrub brush and publicly called me a peasant who needed to learn her place. My fiancé, the man who promised to protect me, just stood there and laughed along with them. They thought they had finally put a penniless nobody in her place. They had no idea they had just insulted the sole heir to a European throne. 10 minutes later, a 20-car Royal Motorcade crashed their private garden party, and my life changed forever. For 3 years I lived a lie, but I did it for love. My name, as far as anyone in Boston knew, was Clara Miller. I was a quiet, unassuming art restorer working at a mid-level gallery. I wore vintage sweaters, drank cheap coffee, and drove a beat-up Honda Civic that squeaked when I made left turns. I was overwhelmingly aggressively ordinary, and that was exactly the point. When you are born Princess Clara Genevieve of the Royal House of Amsberg-Hessen, ordinary is the ultimate luxury. My grandmother, Queen Genevieve, had ruled our small but fiercely wealthy European principality with an iron fist. But after a severe kidnapping attempt when I was 7, she realized the crown was a target. She sent me to the United States under the care of a trusted governess to live a normal life until my 25th birthday, at which point I was expected to return and assume my duties. I cherished my anonymity. I loved being just Clara. Then I met Theodore Kensington. Theo was the heir to the Kensington shipping empire. He was pure New England old money, the kind of wealth that comes with trust funds, inherited sprawling estates, and an unshakable sense of superiority. When we first met at a gallery exhibition, he was charming, self-deprecating, and seemingly embarrassed by his family's immense wealth. He told me he loved my simplicity. He loved that I didn't care about designer labels or country club memberships. For a long time, I truly believed him. But as our relationship progressed, the cracks began to show. Theo's family, particularly his mother, Beatrice Kensington, was a nightmare masquerading as a socialite. Beatrice was a woman who communicated entirely in passive-aggressive compliments and icy stares. To her, I was a tragic charity case that her son had picked up off the street. She made no secret of her disdain for my common background. When Theo proposed, I almost said no. I knew that marrying him meant eventually revealing my true identity. I had planned to tell him the truth the night he put the diamond ring on my finger, but when I looked into his eyes, a sudden wave of hesitation washed over me. I wanted to be sure he loved Clara Miller, the struggling art restorer, before I handed him the keys to a kingdom. I decided to wait until a week before the wedding to tell him. It was the biggest mistake of my life. The bridal shower was supposed to be a small, intimate gathering, or so Theo promised. Just my mother, my sister Victoria, and a few aunts Clara. Don't stress about it, he had said, kissing my forehead as he dropped me off at the iron gates of the Kensington family's sprawling Rhode Island estate. It'll be over before you know it. I should have known better. I walked up the sweeping gravel driveway wearing a simple pale blue sundress I had bought off the rack at a department store. I thought I looked nice, appropriate for a garden lunch. But the moment the massive oak doors swung open, my stomach plummeted. The foyer was filled with dozens of women draped in Oscar de la Renta, Chanel, and Cartier. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated with silver trays of champagne. A string quartet played softly in the corner of the grand living room. This wasn't a small family gathering. This was a high society gala, and I was the evening's main entertainment. Beatrice Kensington glided toward me, her eyes sweeping over my dress like I was covered in mud. She wore a tailored cream suit and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Clara, darling," she purred, her voice carrying over the chatter of the room. "You actually came, and wearing, well, isn't that a quaint little outfit? It's so brave of you to shop off the rack for your own shower." A few women nearby tittered. My cheeks burned, but I forced a polite smile. "Thank you for hosting this, Mrs. Kensington. It's beautiful." "Only the best for my son," she replied smoothly, turning her back to me. "Come along. The guests are dying to meet the girl who managed to trap our Theo." For the next 2 hours, I was subjected to a relentless barrage of microaggressions. Victoria, Theo's younger sister, introduced me to her friends as Theo's little project. I was asked repeatedly what my parents did for a living. Since my parents had passed away in a plane crash when I was an infant, the very event that made my grandmother fiercely overprotective, I simply told them they were no longer with us. Oh, how tragic. One of Beatrice's friends, a woman named Cynthia, sighed dramatically, sipping her mimosa. No family money to speak of then. However will you manage the social season? Theo and I manage fine on our own, I replied evenly. Yes, but Theo is a Kensington, Cynthia pressed. He's used to a certain standard. It's a lot of pressure for a girl from… Where did you say you were from? Upstate New York? How dreadfully rural. I retreated to the corner of the room, clutching a glass of sparkling water, counting down the minutes until I could leave. I kept checking my phone, hoping Theo would text me, hoping he would show up to rescue me as he had promised. But my screen remained blank. I felt a profound sense of isolation. Here I was, surrounded by women who viewed themselves as American royalty, judging me for being common. If only they knew that the ring on my finger, a Kensington family heirloom that Beatrice had loudly complained about giving to me, was a trinket compared to the crown jewels sitting in a vault in Europe waiting for my head. But I held my tongue. I endured the snide remarks, the condescending pats on the arm, the whispered insults. I told myself I was doing this for Theo. I loved him, and I could handle a few snobby women. Then came the gift opening ceremony, and that was when the Kensington family crossed a line they could never uncross. Ladies, ladies, gather around, Beatrice announced, clapping her manicured hands together. The string quartet faded into silence. It is time for the bride-to-be to open her presents. I was ushered to a velvet armchair placed strategically in the center of the room. 50 pairs of eyes locked onto me. The atmosphere shifted from mildly condescending to openly predatory. Victoria sat on the sofa opposite me, her phone out, clearly recording. A maid brought over a mountain of impeccably wrapped boxes. I pasted on a smile and began. The first few gifts were standard if extravagant baccarat crystal vases, silver serving platters, a set of silk sheets that probably cost more than my car. I thanked each woman graciously, trying to ignore the whispers that I wouldn't know how to properly care for such fine things. Then Beatrice stood up. She walked over to the pile and produced a large flat box wrapped in plain brown paper. It stood out starkly against the shimmering silver and gold foil of the other gifts. "This one is from me, Clara," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "A very special family tradition. It's vital that a new wife understands her role when she marries into the Kensington family." The room went dead silent. Even the waiters stopped moving. I took the box, my hands trembling slightly. I pulled the ribbon and tore away the brown paper. Inside was a framed document. I stared at it, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. It was a fake genealogical tree. At the top, in ornate calligraphy, was the Kensington name tracing back to the Mayflower, flanked by crests and prominent historical figures. At the bottom, disconnected from the rest, was my name, Clara Miller. Next to it was a cartoonish illustration of a peasant girl in rags holding a pitchfork. Beneath the glass, taped to the bottom of the frame, was a cheap plastic scrub brush. I looked up, stunned. "I don't understand." Beatrice laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Oh, darling, it's quite simple. We value heritage in this family. Theo has a bleeding heart picking up strays, but reality must be faced. You are a peasant. You bring nothing to this family but a pretty face and empty pockets. The brush is to remind you that no matter how many of my son's credit cards you use to dress yourself up, your true place in this house is on your knees scrubbing the floors. It's a reminder not to get above your station." A chorus of soft gasps rippled through the room, followed by a wave of cruel, suppressed giggles. Victoria didn't even bother suppressing hers. She laughed out loud, leaning closer to capture my humiliation on her phone. My throat tightened. The sheer malice of the gesture was breathtaking. I looked around the room, desperate for a friendly face, but found only cold amusement. "Mom, isn't that a little harsh?" a voice called out from the doorway. I whipped my head around. Theo had finally arrived. He was standing near the entrance, a drink already in his hand. My heart leaped. Thank God, I thought. He's going to stop this. He's going to throw them out or take me away. "Theo," I whispered, standing up, clutching the horrific frame. Theo walked into the room looking from the frame to his mother. Beatrice raised an eyebrow at him, daring him to challenge her. Theo looked at me, then down at the scrub brush. And then Theodore Kensington, the man I was supposed to marry, chuckled. "Come on, Clara," Theo said, waving his hand dismissively. "It's just a joke. My mom has a dry sense of humor. Don't be so sensitive. Sit down and open the rest." He didn't defend me. He didn't take the frame from my hands and smash it. He didn't tell his mother she had crossed a line. He just took a sip of his scotch and told me to take a joke. In that single shattering moment, the illusion broke. The man I loved vanished, replaced by a weak, cowardly boy who was terrified of his mother's money. All the sacrifices I had made, all the insults I had swallowed over the past 3 years to protect this relationship evaporated. I felt a cold, absolute calm wash over me. "A joke," I repeated slowly. My voice sounded different, lower, steadier. It was a voice I hadn't used since I left Europe. It was the voice of Queen Genevieve. "Yes, a joke," Beatrice snapped, losing her sweet facade. "Good Lord, the girl has no class and no sense of humor. Theo, I told you she was too fragile for our world." I didn't look at Beatrice. I looked dead at Theo. "You think this is funny?" Theo shifted uncomfortably. "Clara, stop making a scene in front of my mother's friends. I'm not making a scene." "Theodore," I said smoothly. I dropped the framed family tree onto the hardwood floor. The glass shattered with a loud, violent crash. Several women shrieked and jumped back. "Look what you've done!" Beatrice shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You ungrateful little tramp! You are completely unhinged." I ignored her. I reached into my small clutch purse and pulled out my phone. For 3 years, I'd kept a secondary, highly encrypted application on this phone. I opened it, clicked on a single contact named Arthur, and typed a 4-word message. "Protocol Alpha. Execute immediately." I hit send. Then I dropped my phone back into my purse and snapped it shut. "What are you doing?" Theo demanded, stepping forward. "Clara, apologize to my mother right now." I slowly lifted my chin and looked at the Kensington family. I was done hiding. I was done playing the peasant. "I have nothing to apologize for," I said, my voice cutting through the tension in the room like a steel blade. "But you, Beatrice, should really be careful about who you call a peasant. You never know who you might be speaking to." "I know exactly who I'm speaking to," Beatrice sneered. "A nobody, a gold-digging, nobody who has overstayed her welcome." "Oh, we'll see about that," I whispered, glancing at the antique grandfather clock in the corner. Arthur was the head of my royal security detail stationed 24 hours a day at a discreet compound just 5 miles from wherever I was. Protocol Alpha meant my cover was blown. I was in a hostile environment, and I required immediate, overwhelming extraction. I just had to keep them talking for exactly 10 minutes. The silence in the grand living room was so absolute, you could hear the champagne bubbles popping in Cynthia's glass. The shattered glass of the framed family tree lay around my sensible flats like a glittering pool of ice. "Have you lost your mind?" Theo hissed, stepping over a piece of the broken frame. He reached out to grab my upper arm, his grip tight and bruising. "You are embarrassing me, Clara. Pick that up now." I looked down at his hand gripping my arm, and then up into his flushed, angry face. The last vestige of the man I thought I loved dissolved instantly. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply channeled the ice-cold authority of my grandmother, Queen Genevieve. "Remove your hand from me, Theodore," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but the lethal calmness in it made him flinch. He let go as if I had burned him. "How dare you speak to my son that way under my roof?" Beatrice shrieked, her face turning an ugly shade of mottled red. She turned to a terrified-looking maid hovering near the hallway. "Maria, bring a dustpan and call security. Miss Miller's leaving. She can wait for a taxi at the bottom of the driveway." "I am leaving," I replied, smoothing down the skirt of my department store dress. "But I will not be requiring a taxi, and I strongly suggest you tell your gate guards to open the main iron gates. They are about to have a very difficult time if they don't." Aunt Cordelia, a terrifyingly thin woman dripping in pearls, let out a harsh bark of laughter. What on earth is the girl blathering about? Has poverty finally driven her mad? She's bluffing. Victoria sneered from the sofa, still holding her phone up her thumb, hovering over the record button. She's just trying to save face because Mom completely destroyed her. This is so pathetic. Wait until my followers see this. I didn't answer. I just watched the antique grandfather clock in the corner of the room. The brass pendulum swung back and forth. Tick, tock. 8 minutes left. Security is on their way, Beatrice announced, crossing her arms. Her cream Oscar de la Renta suit suddenly looked rigid, like armor she was using to shield herself from my unexpected defiance. You have 5 minutes to gather whatever cheap things you brought with you and walk out that door, Clara. If you don't, Harrison will physically remove you. I stood perfectly still in the center of the room. The 50 high society women around me began to murmur their initial shock, giving way to hungry gossip. They whispered behind their hands, casting venomous glares in my direction. I was a cornered animal to them, a temporary amusement that had outstayed its welcome. They had no idea they were the ones in the cage. 5 minutes. Theo paced back and forth, dragging a hand through his perfectly styled hair. Why are you doing this? I told you it was a joke. You're ruining everything. If you just apologize right now, maybe we can fix this. Fix this? I echoed, genuinely amused. Theodore, there is nothing left to fix. You stood by while your mother handed me a scrub brush and called me a peasant. You laughed. You showed me exactly the kind of man you are. A coward. I am a Kensington. He exploded, his face inches from mine. You are nothing. I was giving you the world. You were giving me a cage, I whispered back. Suddenly a low rhythmic vibration began to pulse through the hardwood floors of the estate. It started as a faint hum, barely noticeable over the string quartet, which had nervously started playing Vivaldi again in an attempt to restore order. But the hum grew louder. It turned into a deep guttural roar of heavy engines. Beatrice frowned, looking toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the sprawling front lawn and the winding gravel driveway. What in the world is that racket? Harrison, the Kensington's head of private security, sprinted into the room. His face was completely drained of blood, and he was clutching his two-way radio like a lifeline. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Beatrice in absolute panic. Mrs. Kensington. Harrison stammered out of breath. We have a situation at the main gate. I told you to throw this girl out? Harrison, not give me status updates. Beatrice snapped. Ma'am, the gate is gone. Harrison said, his voice trembling. Theo froze. What do you mean the gate is gone? I mean a reinforced armored SUV just drove straight through the wrought iron, Harrison said, wiping sweat from his forehead. There's a convoy. I've never seen anything like it. They ignored our commands to halt. They disarmed my men at the gate in under 10 seconds. Before Beatrice could utter another word, the sound of screeching tires echoed from the front courtyard. The heavy crunch of gravel was deafening. The 50 women in the room rushed to the windows, their champagne glasses forgotten. Oh my God! Cynthia gasped, pressing her hand against the glass. I didn't need to look. I knew exactly what was outside. 20 black, heavily armored vehicles had swarmed the Kensington estate. Leading the pack were 2 Mercedes Maybach Pullmans flanked by imposing Suburbans outfitted with tactical gear and flashing diplomatic strobe lights. On the hood of the Maybachs fluttered the royal standard of Amsberg-Hessen, a golden eagle against a field of crimson and cobalt. The front doors of the mansion were suddenly thrown open with a violent crash. The heavy oak hit the interior walls so hard the plaster cracked. Into the foyer poured a dozen men and women in impeccably tailored black suits, earpieces in place, moving with terrifying synchronized precision. They fanned out across the living room, instantly securing every exit window and blind spot. The string quartet stopped playing abruptly, the cellist dropping his bow in terror. Then walking slowly through the sea of tactical agents came Arthur Pendleton. Arthur was my grandmother's most trusted asset. He was a former British SAS commander, a man whose resting expression could freeze water. He stepped over the threshold of the Kensington living room, his cold gray eyes sweeping over the terrified socialites, dismissing them instantly, until his gaze found me standing in the center of the shattered glass. "What is the meaning of this?" Beatrice screamed, finally finding her voice. She stepped forward, trying to block Arthur's path. "Who do you think you are?" "You are trespassing on private property. I am calling the FBI." Arthur didn't even look at her. He made a subtle motion with his left hand, and two massive security agents instantly stepped in front of Beatrice, forcing her back. She gasped, stumbling on her high heels. Arthur walked purposefully toward me, his heavy footsteps echoing in the dead silent room. When he reached me, he didn't bark orders. He didn't ask if I was okay. Instead, this terrifying, battle-hardened commander stopped, placed his right foot behind his left, and executed a flawless deep bow. "Your Royal Highness," Arthur said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the cavernous room. "Protocol Alpha is active, the perimeter is secure, and diplomatic clearance has been established. We are ready to escort you home." If a bomb had gone off in the room, it would have caused less shock. Victoria dropped her phone. It hit the floor with a loud clack, the screen splintering. Cynthia let out a choked, wheezing sound and swayed on her feet, leaning heavily against Aunt Cordelia. Theo stared at Arthur, then at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Clara, what is he talking about? What is going on?" "There is no Clara Miller Theodore," I said softly, the alias feeling strange and foreign on my tongue for the first time in 3 years. I stood up a little straighter, my posture shifting naturally into the rigid aristocratic bearing my governess had drilled into me since childhood. "My name is Princess Clara Genevieve of the sovereign house of Amsberg-Hessen. I am the sole heir to the throne." "This is insane," Beatrice hissed, clawing her way around the two agents, though she kept a safe distance from Arthur. "This is a prank. A sick, elaborate prank, Theo. She hired actors to embarrass us." Arthur slowly turned his head to look at Beatrice. "Madam, I am Commander Arthur Pendleton of the Royal Amsberg Guard. The vehicles outside carry sovereign diplomatic plates recognized by the United States Department of State. If you or your staff attempt to impede Her Highness's departure, it will be treated as an international incident and an act of aggression against the Crown. Do I make myself perfectly clear? Beatrice looked out the window again, staring at the golden eagle flags waving on the hoods of the Maybachs. The blood drained from her face, leaving her pale beneath her expensive bronzer. The reality was crashing down on her. The peasant she had just gifted a scrub brush to outrank her in ways her old money American brain couldn't even process. I looked down at my left hand. The Kensington family heirloom ring, a modest 2-carat sapphire surrounded by diamonds, felt heavy and dirty on my finger. I slipped it off. I walked over to Theo, who was trembling. He looked completely shattered, staring at me as if he were seeing a ghost. "I wanted to be sure," I told him, holding the ring out. "I wanted to know that you loved me for me before I brought you into my world. A world of real power, Theodore. But you couldn't even protect me from a room full of mean girls." I dropped the ring into his open palm. "Wait," Theo croaked, grabbing my hand. "Clara, please, I love you. I'm sorry. I didn't know." "That's exactly the point," I said, pulling my hand away. "You didn't know I had power, so you didn't think I deserved respect." I turned to Beatrice, who was now leaning against an armchair, clutching her chest as if she were about to faint. "Before I leave, Beatrice, I think you should know something," I said, my voice dripping with polite aristocratic venom. "My family's intelligence division ran a very thorough background check on the Kensington Empire before I agreed to marry your son. We know everything." Beatrice's eyes widened in sheer terror. "We know about the 3 failed cargo ships in the Pacific." I continued ticking the points off on my fingers. "We know about the leveraged estates. We know that your husband's shipping company is hemorrhaging money and that you are living entirely on a rapidly expiring line of credit to keep up appearances in front of these lovely ladies." A collective gasp swept through the room. The women who had been judging me moments ago were now staring at Beatrice with sudden predatory curiosity. In high society, poverty was a worse crime than murder. "Shut up," Beatrice whispered, looking frantically at her friends. "Don't listen to her. She's lying. My grandmother, the Queen, didn't approve of the match," I said, smoothly ignoring her panic. "But I begged her. I told her Theo was a good man. So as a wedding gift, my family's financial ministers had already drafted the paperwork to quietly absorb your father's debts. We were going to bail out the Kensington Empire to the tune of $400 million. It would have been pocket change to my family. But you would have kept your homes, your cars, and your precious status." Theo sank to his knees, literally collapsing under the weight of what he had just lost. He buried his face in his hands. But now, I looked down at the scrub brush resting amongst the shattered glass of the fake family tree. "Now I think you're going to need that brush, Beatrice, because when the banks foreclose on this house next month, you'll need a marketable skill." I turned to Arthur. "I'm ready, Commander." "Make way for Her Royal Highness," Arthur barked. The tactical agents formed a tight, impenetrable phalanx around me. As I walked toward the ruined oak doors, the 50 women of Rhode Island high society, the women who had mocked my clothes and my family, physically scrambled backward, pressing themselves against the walls to clear a path. Some even bowed their heads, unsure of what else to do in the presence of actual royalty. I walked out into the bright sunshine, leaving my cheap department store dress fluttering in the breeze. A guard opened the heavy bulletproof door of the Maybach. I slid into the rich leather interior, the door slamming shut with a heavy final thud. As the 20-car motorcade reversed and tore out of the Kensington estate, leaving deep tracks in their perfectly manicured gravel, I didn't look back once. I was done playing peasant. The Queen was going home. The interior of the armored Maybach was a sanctuary of soundproofed silence, a stark contrast to the absolute pandemonium I had just left behind. As the motorcade sped down the winding Rhode Island highways, the adrenaline that had fueled my grand exit began to ebb, replaced by a cold, settling reality. I sank into the plush cream-colored leather seat, staring at the privacy partition that separated me from the driver. Commander Arthur Pendleton sat opposite me, his posture rigid, his tablet already out as he tapped furiously coordinating our extraction. He didn't speak until we had cleared the county lines, ensuring we were no longer in local jurisdictions that Beatrice Kensington might attempt to manipulate with her fading checkbook. "Your Highness?" Arthur said, his tone softening just a fraction, though his eyes remained vigilant. "The perimeter is entirely clear. We are en route to the private tarmac at TF Green Airport. Your personal aircraft has been prepped and is awaiting our arrival. Air traffic control has already granted diplomatic priority clearance." Thank you, Arthur," I murmured, rubbing my bare left ring finger. The absence of Theo's sapphire felt incredibly light. "Were there any issues with the local authorities?" Arthur offered a rare, grim smile. "None that couldn't be solved by a flash of sovereign credentials and the realization that intervening would cause an international diplomatic crisis. I believe Mrs. Kensington was attempting to dial 911 as we pulled out, but I suspect the dispatchers will be less than sympathetic to a noise complaint against a foreign head of state security detail." I let out a breath that was half laugh, half sigh. 3 years of playing Clara Miller, the meek art restorer, had taken a psychological toll I hadn't fully recognized until this very moment. The constant need to shrink myself, to apologize for my lack of pedigree, to politely nod while women like Cynthia and Aunt Cordelia dissected my worth, it was over. Within 40 minutes, our motorcade breached the gates of the private aviation terminal. Bypassing all standard security protocols, our vehicles drove directly onto the tarmac, coming to a halt at the base of the stairs, leading up to a massive Boeing 747-8 VIP. Its sleek white fuselage bore the gold-leafed crest of Amsberg, Hessen. Standing at attention at the bottom of the stairs were Captain Reynolds and a full flight crew, all bowing deeply as I stepped out of the vehicle. "Welcome back, Your Highness." Captain Reynolds said, his voice brimming with genuine warmth. I climbed the stairs and stepped into the cabin, instantly enveloped in the familiar scents of polished mahogany, fresh lilies, and ozone. The jet was a flying palace, complete with a master suite, a boardroom, and a full communications center. Waiting for me in the master suite was my royal wardrobe mistress, Eleanor. She had already laid out a tailored charcoal suit and a silk blouse, a far cry from the department store sundress I had worn to my own emotional execution. After changing and washing my face, I walked into the main lounge area. Arthur was waiting, holding an encrypted tablet out to me. "I thought you should see this, ma'am," he said, his expression completely unreadable. It appears Theodore's sister Victoria did not fully understand the implications of her actions. I took the tablet. It was displaying a global social media platform. The top trending hashtag worldwide was hashtag Kensington Royal Scandal, closely followed by Peasant Princess. "What did she do?" I asked, tapping the screen. In her panic, or perhaps her sheer vanity, Victoria Kensington live-streamed the entire confrontation, Arthur explained. She had her phone recording during the gift opening. When she dropped her phone during my entrance, the live feed continued broadcasting. It captured everything: the scrub brush, the financial revelations, and my formal address to you as Her Royal Highness. I watched the footage. It was shaky, angled upward from the floor, where Victoria had dropped it, but the audio was crystal clear. Millions of people had watched Beatrice Kensington hand a scrub brush to a disguised European princess. They heard Theo laughing. They heard my complete dissection of their impending bankruptcy. The internet naturally was entirely merciless. Commentators were tearing the Kensington family apart. Financial analysts were already scrutinizing the family's public holdings based on my comments. Shares in Kensington Shipping had plummeted 14% in the last 30 minutes alone. Victoria's social media accounts were being flooded with so much vitriol that she had been forced to deactivate them. The high society facade they had meticulously maintained for a century was being incinerated in real time. My private secure line chimed. It was the only phone I had kept, the one connecting me directly to the palace. I handed the tablet back to Arthur and answered. "Grandmother," I said, my voice steady. "Clara, my darling." Queen Genevieve's voice crackled through the secure satellite connection. Despite being in her late 70s, her voice held the strength of a drawn bowstring. "I have just been briefed by Arthur's team. Are you unharmed?" "I am fine, grandmother. Just disillusioned." "I told you the boy was weak, Clara. Old money breeds soft spines," she said matter-of-factly, without a hint of "I told you so." She only dealt in absolute realities. "You gave him a chance to prove his worth, and he showed his true nature. We will not mourn the loss of a coward." "I know. You were right. I usually am," she replied crisply. "Now rest. Eat something. By the time you land in our airspace, the Kensington problem will be entirely handled. They insulted the crown. They insulted you. And I will ensure the world knows exactly what happens when they attempt to humiliate the future Queen of Amsberg-Hessen." The flight across the Atlantic felt both incredibly long and much too short. As the Boeing began its descent into the private royal airstrip, nestled in the emerald valleys of Amsberg-Hessen, I looked out the window at the familiar landscape of my childhood. The towering spires of the capital city pierced through the morning mist, and the sprawling stone architecture of the royal palace loomed on the highest hill, a fortress of ancient power. When the plane touched down, the reception was drastically different from my quiet departure 3 years ago. The tarmac was lined with the royal guard in full ceremonial dress. Chancellor Frederick, my grandmother's chief advisor, stood at the base of the stairs holding a leather folio. I descended the stairs not as Clara Miller, but as Princess Clara Genevieve. The transition was complete. The air here smelled of pine and rain, instantly washing away the lingering stench of Beatrice Kensington's cloying designer perfume. "Welcome home, Your Royal Highness," Chancellor Frederick said, bowing deeply. He was an older man, sharp as a tack, with a mind built for political warfare. "Her Majesty is waiting for you in the solar." A swift helicopter ride took us directly to the palace grounds. I walked through the vaulted marble corridors, the heavy double doors of the solar swinging open as I approached. Queen Genevieve sat near a massive fireplace sipping tea. She wore a perfectly tailored dark dress, her silver hair pulled back flawlessly, her sharp blue eyes locking onto me the second I entered. I hurried across the room and sank into a deep curtsy, but she waved it off, standing to embrace me tightly. For a moment, the fierce monarch melted away, leaving only a grandmother relieved to have her child back. "Let me look at you," she demanded, pulling back. "You look entirely too thin. The Americans do not know how to feed people." "It's good to be home," I whispered. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to the velvet armchair opposite hers. Lady Margaret, her chief lady-in-waiting, silently poured me a cup of Earl Grey. "We have much to discuss and a very tight schedule. Chancellor Frederick, bring Her Highness up to speed." Frederick stepped forward, opening his folio. "Ma'am, as expected, the Kensington family is attempting a frantic damage control campaign. Beatrice Kensington has hired a prominent PR firm in New York. They're drafting a press release claiming that you maliciously deceived their family, that the scrub brush was a poorly received inside joke, and that your claims regarding their finances were slanderous lies designed to ruin them." I took a sip of my tea, feeling a spark of anger ignite in my chest. They are doubling down. Of course they are. Beatrice cannot admit defeat. "She will not have a choice," Queen Genevieve said smoothly, her eyes gleaming with predatory intelligence. "Frederick, what was our countermeasure, Spunny?" At 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, acting on Her Majesty's orders, the Crown's financial ministers released a heavily audited, entirely legal dossier to the investigative desk of the Wall Street Journal, Frederick stated calmly. "It details the exact nature of the Kensington shipping empire's insolvency. Furthermore, we utilized our holding companies to acquire the majority of their outstanding debt from their American lenders." I stopped with my teacup halfway to my mouth. I stared at my grandmother. "You bought their debt?" "I bought their leash," the Queen corrected with a terrifyingly serene smile. "When I saw the video of that wretched woman handing you a scrub brush, I decided that simply walking away was insufficient. They believed they could discard you because they held the financial high ground, so I removed the ground. By acquiring the debt," Frederick continued, "we instantly triggered the change of control clauses in their primary loan agreements. We have called in the full balance, immediately. They owe us $350 million payable by Friday." "Which they do not have." I realized the sheer scale of the retaliation washing over me. "Which they do not have," the Queen agreed. "The banks will seize the Rhode Island estate by the end of the month. The shipping fleet will be liquidated at auction. Beatrice Kensington will be fortunate if she is left with a 2-bedroom apartment in a secondary city." It was a staggering absolute destruction of a century-old dynasty executed in less than 24 hours, and they had brought it entirely upon themselves for the sake of a cruel classist joke. "What about Theo?" I asked, my voice quieter now. "Ah, yes. The boy—" Queen Genevieve sighed, waving her hand dismissively. "He boarded a commercial flight to Europe last night. He arrived at our outer security gates 3 hours ago demanding to see you. He claims he was a victim of his mother's overbearing nature and that he still intends to marry you." I felt a wave of profound disgust. "He flew commercial to beg for his trust fund." "Precisely," my grandmother said. "I had the Royal Guard turn him away. I believe he is currently stranded at the local airport as his credit cards have begun to violently decline." I stood up, walking to the towering windows that overlooked the sweeping gardens of the palace. The rain had started to fall, misting the glass. I thought about the Clara who had nervously walked into that bridal shower, desperate for approval, terrified of not being enough for high society. That girl was gone, shattered, right alongside the fake family tree. "Do you pity them, Clara?" the Queen asked softly from behind me. "No," I said, turning back to face the most powerful woman I knew. I set my jaw, feeling the weight of my heritage settling comfortably onto my shoulders. "They demanded a peasant. Let them learn exactly how the peasantry lives." Theodore Kensington did not handle the reality of his new life with any measure of grace. By the 3rd day of his self-imposed exile at the regional airport just outside our borders, he had exhausted his rapidly dwindling funds and his remaining shreds of dignity. My grandmother's financial ministers had moved with the lethal precision of a military strike. The Kensington credit lines were frozen. Their bank accounts were locked under emergency injunctions pending the debt restructuring. Theo was for all intents and purposes entirely broke in a foreign country. Arthur Pendleton entered the private library, where I was reviewing the morning briefings, his posture as impeccably straight as ever. "Your Royal Highness," he said, clearing his throat slightly. "We have a developing situation at the regional terminal. Mr. Kensington has resorted to creating a public spectacle. He is currently shouting at a ticketing agent and attempting to contact American tabloids via a borrowed cell phone. He claims he has an explosive story about the crown." I set down my pen, a cold wave of exhaustion washing over me. "What kind of story, Arthur?" "He is threatening to invent allegations that you orchestrated his family's financial ruin as part of a premeditated scam," Arthur replied, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "He's also threatening to sell private photographs and details of your relationship. Local authorities are requesting permission to arrest him for disturbing the peace, but given his connection to you, they are waiting for palace instruction." I looked out the window at the sprawling, meticulously manicured palace gardens. I had loved him once, or at least I had loved the illusion of him. To see him reduced to a cornered, manipulative child throwing a tantrum in an airport terminal was pathetic. It wasn't even anger I felt anymore. It was just a profound, overwhelming pity. Don't let them arrest him," I said, standing up and smoothing the skirt of my tailored navy dress. "Arresting him gives him the martyr narrative he so desperately wants. Prepare a vehicle, Arthur. I'm going to the airport. I will handle Theodore myself." Arthur looked as though he wanted to object, a rare flicker of concern crossing his stoic features. "Ma'am, is that wise? The man is desperate." "Oh, desperation makes people sloppy," I replied softly. "I hid behind the guise of Clara Miller for 3 years. I will not hide behind palace walls now." 30 minutes later, my motorcade pulled up to the small regional airport. The terminal was entirely locked down by the Royal Guard. I walked through the sliding glass doors, flanked by Arthur and 3 heavily armed agents. Theo was sitting on a plastic bench near the baggage claim, looking disheveled, frantic, and completely, utterly defeated. His designer suit was wrinkled, his hair unwashed, and he was clutching a cheap prepaid mobile phone. When he saw me walking toward him, he shot up to his feet, a look of desperate manic relief washing over his face. "Clara—" He gasped, taking a step forward before Arthur's agent smoothly blocked his path. "Clara, thank God. You have to tell them to let me through. My cards are all declining. My mother is hysterical. The banks are trying to take the house. You have to fix this." He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't asking how I was. His first instinct, his only instinct, was to demand that I save his money. "There is no fixing this, Theodore," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the empty terminal. "The debt your father accumulated was legally acquired by our holding companies. Your family was bankrupt long before I sat in that living room. The only difference is that now your creditors are not American banks who care about the Kensington name. Your creditor is my grandmother, and she does not negotiate." Theo's face contorted into an ugly, furious sneer. "You planned this. You lied to me for 3 years. You pretended to be some poor, pathetic nobody making me feel sorry for you. You trapped me. I pretended to be ordinary to see if you were capable of loving someone without a pedigree." I corrected him, my tone completely flat. "And you failed. You let your mother hand me a scrub brush and call me a peasant. You laughed, Theo. You laughed while the woman you supposedly loved was humiliated. It was a joke." He screamed, his voice cracking. "And now you're stealing my family's legacy over a joke. I am not stealing anything. I am foreclosing," I said coldly. "And as for your threats to the tabloids, I brought a friend to clarify your legal standing." I nodded to the man standing just behind Arthur. Jonathan Pierce, the Crown's lead international litigator, stepped forward. He unclasped his leather briefcase and handed Theo a thick manila envelope. "What is this?" Theo demanded, looking at the envelope as if it were a bomb. "A reminder, Mr. Kensington," Jonathan said smoothly, his British accent dripping with condescension. 2 years ago, when you asked Her Highness to move into your Boston apartment, you insisted she sign a cohabitation agreement to protect your family's assets from her. Do you remember? Theo blinked, clearly confused. Yes, my mother's lawyers drafted it, to protect my trust fund. Actually, Jonathan smiled thinly. The document you forced her to sign was entirely rewritten by our legal department before she returned it to you. You never bothered to read the revised copy. It included a universally binding airtight non-disclosure agreement. If you utter a single word to the press about Her Highness or release any photographs, you will be sued for breach of contract. The penalty clause is set at $50 million, money which, as we have established, you do not possess. Theo stared at the envelope in horror. The last card he had to play had just been expertly burned to ash. You have nothing left, Theodore. I said, stepping closer to the line of agents. I looked him dead in the eyes, searching for any trace of the man I had once wanted to marry. There was nothing there but a hollow, terrified shell. Arthur has arranged a coach-class ticket for you on the next commercial flight back to Boston. Do not ever return to this country. Do not attempt to contact me again. Go home, Theodore, and start packing. I turned my back on him and walked out of the terminal. I didn't look back, not even when I heard him drop to the floor sobbing uncontrollably. 6 weeks later, the crisp autumn air of New England felt entirely different than it had when I lived there. Perhaps because I was no longer navigating it in a squeaky Honda Civic. I sat in the back of the armored Maybach, watching the familiar scenery of the Rhode Island coastline roll by. I was returning to the scene of the crime, so to speak. The Kensington estate, the sprawling historic mansion where Beatrice Kensington had thrown my disastrous bridal shower, was going up for public auction. The banks acting on behalf of the Crown had aggressively expedited the foreclosure. We are approaching the property, Your Highness, Arthur said from the front passenger seat. Local police have set up barricades to keep the press at bay. The auction is restricted to pre-registered bidders as per your instructions. Excellent, I replied, adjusting the cuffs of my pristine white blazer. When the motorcade pulled through the massive wrought iron gates, the very gates Arthur's team had smashed through weeks prior, now hastily repaired, the front lawn looked entirely different. Gone were the valet stands and the string quartets. In their place were rows of folding chairs, an auctioneer's podium, and a crowd of wealthy real estate developers, investors, and morbidly curious socialites. As I stepped out of the vehicle, flanked by my security detail, a heavy silence fell over the lawn. The crowd parted instantly. They recognized me from the viral videos. They knew exactly who held the Kensington debt. I walked straight to the front row, taking a seat reserved exclusively for the Crown's representatives. And then I saw her. Beatrice Kensington was standing near the grand oak doors of the house she had ruled like a tyrant for 3 decades. She looked as though she had aged 10 years in 6 weeks. Her signature Oscar de la Renta suits were gone, replaced by a plain, unbranded dark dress. Her hair lacked its usual flawless volume, and her eyes were dark, sunken, and haunted. Beside her stood Victoria, looking equally devastated, scrolling mindlessly on a phone that likely had no active social media accounts left. Theo was nowhere to be seen. Beatrice locked eyes with me. For a moment, a flash of her old venomous pride flared up, but it was quickly extinguished by the crushing weight of her reality. She looked away, staring at the ground. William Davenport, the lead auctioneer, stepped up to the podium and tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today for the absolute auction of the Kensington estate, including all remaining fixtures and the property itself. We will begin the bidding for the main estate at $15 million. The bidding was swift and ruthless. A developer from New York immediately raised his paddle. A local hedge fund manager countered. The price ticked up $16 million, $17 million, $18 million. Beatrice watched in agonizing silence as her ancestral home was haggled over like a cheap trinket at a yard sale. When the bidding stalled at $22 million, William Davenport called out, "Going once at $22 million, going twice." I calmly raised my paddle. $30 million. The entire lawn gasped. The New York developer turned around, his eyes wide. No one was going to counterbid an international monarch with limitless resources. $30 million to the bidder in the front row. William stammered, wiping his brow. Do I hear 31 no going once, going twice? Sold. To Her Royal Highness. The gavel slammed down. It echoed across the lawn like a gunshot. The Kensington estate legally belonged to me. I stood up, signaling to Arthur that we were leaving. But before I walked back to the motorcade, I took a deliberate detour, walking up the front steps to where Beatrice Kensington was standing. My guards formed a loose semicircle, keeping the gawking crowd at a distance. Beatrice shrank back against the heavy wooden doors. You came here to gloat, she whispered, her voice raspy and broken. You took everything. My home, my son's future, my reputation. Are you satisfied? I didn't take anything, Beatrice, I said calmly, looking at the grand foyer behind her, the exact spot where she had handed me the scrub brush. Your family's greed and financial mismanagement took your home. Your son's cowardice cost him his future, and your own cruelty destroyed your reputation. I simply held up a mirror. What are you going to do with my house? She choked out, a tear finally escaping and cutting through her makeup. Tear it down, turn it into a vacation home. Neither, I replied, pulling a small embossed card from my clutch. I held it out to her. Beatrice stared at the card, then slowly reached out and took it. Her eyes scanned the elegant text. The Genevieve Foundation for Women's Advancement. I told her, my voice carrying just enough for the front row of the crowd to hear. I'm converting this entire estate into a fully funded charity center. It will serve as transitional housing and a career training facility for underprivileged women, specifically women who come from nothing and need help building a life. Beatrice's mouth fell open. The ultimate insult to her elitist pride, her sanctuary of high society exclusion, was going to be filled with the very people she had spent her life despising. I thought it was fitting. I continued, offering her a chillingly polite smile. You were so concerned about peasants invading your home, Beatrice. Now they own it. The foundation will teach them valuable skills: computer literacy, financial management. I paused, my eyes locking onto hers with absolute finality. And professional cleaning. I left strict instructions that the program will provide the highest quality scrub brushes on the market. Beatrice let out a soft, broken sob, covering her face with her hands. There was no fight left in her. The Kensington dynasty was officially dead, buried under the weight of their own arrogance. I turned and walked down the steps, the autumn breeze catching my hair. I slid into the back of the Maybach, leaving the wreckage of my old life behind. I was Clara Miller no longer. I was the future queen, and I had a kingdom to run. Exactly 1 year to the day after I walked out of the Kensington estate, in a department store sundress, I returned. Only this time, I wasn't arriving as a nervous fiancé hoping for approval. I was arriving as the Princess Regent of Amsberg-Hessen, and I owned the deed to the very ground I was walking on. The crisp New England autumn was in full swing, painting the Rhode Island coastline in brilliant strokes of gold and crimson. My motorcade, smaller this time, just 5 black SUVs, pulled through the main gates. The wrought iron crest that had once proudly displayed the Kensington family K had been melted down and replaced with the elegant, understated emblem of the Genevieve Foundation for Women's Advancement. I stepped out of my vehicle, breathing in the salty ocean air. Waiting for me at the bottom of the grand stone steps was Dr. Amelia Brooks, the brilliant, no-nonsense philanthropic director I'd poached from a top-tier international charity to run the facility. Your Royal Highness. Amelia smiled, offering a respectful nod rather than a stiff curtsy, exactly as I preferred. Welcome back. We are entirely ready for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The press pool has been vetted, and the first graduating cohort is waiting inside. Thank you, Amelia. The exterior looks phenomenal, I said, looking up at the sprawling brick facade. It truly was a masterpiece of renovation. The pretentious, imposing aura of the mansion had been stripped away. The dark, heavy draperies in the windows were gone, replaced by bright open glass that let the sunlight pour in. We walked up the steps and through the heavy oak doors. Stepping into the grand foyer sent a momentary chill down my spine, but it vanished as soon as I took in the changes. The colossal living room where Beatrice Kensington had staged her little theater of cruelty was unrecognizable. The antique grandfather clock and the velvet armchairs had been auctioned off months ago. In their place was a state-of-the-art vocational training center. Sleek computer stations lined the walls. In the center of the room, the exact spot where the fake family tree had shattered around my feet, was now occupied by a large collaborative conference table where women were taught financial literacy and business management. "It's breathtaking," I murmured, running my hand along the back of one of the desk chairs. Commander Arthur Pendleton materialized beside me, silent as a shadow. "A massive improvement over its previous iteration, ma'am. If I may, I have the final security briefings and the background checks for the new intake of applicants." "Thank you, Arthur," I said, taking the leather folder from him. We walked toward what used to be Theodore's father's private study, now converted into my temporary administrative office for the day. As I sat behind the sleek modern desk, I looked up at Arthur. Over the past year, he had kept tabs on the Kensingtons, ensuring they strictly adhered to the non-disclosure agreements and the financial restructuring terms. "Indulge me, Arthur," I said, softly opening the folder. Where did the dust finally settle? Arthur's lips twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Utterly and completely at the bottom, Your Highness. Following the liquidation of all their assets, the Kensington name became radioactive in high society circles. Cynthia Cordelia and the rest of their former social set entirely ostracized them. Poverty, as you noted, is contagious in those circles." "And Beatrice?" I asked, flipping through a few intake forms. "Living in a subsidized two-bedroom apartment in a very unremarkable suburb of Providence. We are told she frequently attempts to file noise complaints against her neighbors, who routinely ignore her. Theodore is currently employed at a mid-tier car rental desk at the very regional airport he attempted to flee from. He takes the public bus to work." I stopped turning the pages. A profound, quiet sense of closure washed over me. I didn't feel joy at their suffering, but I felt a deep abiding satisfaction in the sheer balance of the universe. They had demanded a peasant. They were now living the grueling, unglamorous reality of the working class they had so openly mocked. But it was the next sheet of paper in the intake file that made my breath catch in my throat. It was an application for the Foundation's 6-month secretarial and administrative independence boot camp. The program provided housing, a modest stipend, and rigorous job placement assistance for women with zero marketable skills and no safety net. I stared at the name printed at the top of the form: Victoria Kensington. I looked up at Arthur, completely stunned. "Is this a joke?" "No, Your Highness," Arthur replied, his voice entirely serious. "It appears Victoria's situation is quite desperate. With no trust fund, no college degree, and her social media reputation permanently destroyed, she has been unable to secure even entry-level employment. She submitted the application 3 days ago. Dr. Brooks flagged it for your personal review." I looked back down at the paper. In the section asking for a personal statement regarding why the applicant needed the program, Victoria's usually pristine, bubbly handwriting was shaky. "I have nothing," she had written. "I don't know how to do anything. I just want to learn how to survive." The sister who had laughed in my face, the girl who had recorded my humiliation for internet clout. She was now begging for a spot in a charity program funded by the very woman she had tormented, housed in the living room she used to call her own. It would have been so easy to deny her. With a single stroke of my pen, I could banish her back to the harsh reality she had helped create. I picked up my gold fountain pen, the heavy weight of the royal crest pressing into my fingers. I thought about the scrub brush. I thought about Theodore's cowardice. Then I thought about Queen Genevieve. True power, she had once told me, is not the ability to destroy your enemies. It is the ability to render them entirely irrelevant. I uncapped the pen. I didn't write a vindictive note. I didn't order Arthur to have her rejected. Instead, I pressed the gold nib to the bottom of the page and wrote one word in bold, undeniable letters: approved. I handed the file back to Arthur. He glanced at the signature, his eyes widening just a fraction before he bowed his head. "A very magnanimous decision, Your Royal Highness. Let her learn," I said quietly, standing up and smoothing my blazer. "Let her walk into her former home and be taught how to type, how to file, and how to work for a living. It's exactly what the Foundation is for. We don't turn away peasants here." I walked out of the office and toward the front doors where the sunlight was pouring in, ready to cut the ribbon on my new empire. The Kensington curse was finally broken, and my reign had officially begun. And that is the story of how the absolute worst, most humiliating day of my life ended up being the greatest awakening I could have ever asked for. Sometimes the trash takes itself out, and sometimes you just have to buy the landfill and turn it into a castle. If you loved hearing how the Kensington family got the ultimate dose of karma, please hit that. Button it really helps out. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who loves a good revenge story. And hit subscribe so you never miss another crazy real-life drama. Remember, always treat people with respect. You never know who is secretly wearing a crown.